Morning, everybody, well, great to be in Oulu in Finland. I'm Dr. Alison Clark-Wilson, and I'm a Principal Research Fellow at UCL Knowledge Lab, which is part of our Institute of Education. And my background is I'm formerly a maths teacher. I started out as a maths teacher 30 years ago, but I was a little bit unusual in that I really embraced technology. And as I've gone through my career, I realized that tends not to be the norm in terms of the teacher community. So I was very much an innovator from the start. As soon as technology found its way into my hands, I was really intrigued by it. I was curious. I wanted to think about how it changed my role as a teacher, how it changed the subject I was going to teach. And I got very involved in teacher development programs and curriculum development programs. And I've actually, if I tot it out, built out quite a lot of products over the years. Interestingly, none of which I ever even thought to commercialize. And now as I sort of sit here 30 years later, thinking about all those products that I really should have built if I'd had the know-how to work with business and work in a more entrepreneurial way, it sort of takes me to where I am now. So my current role is working on a rather interesting project we've had at UCL over the last 3 years, because we got funding from the European Regional Development Fund to work with a really large number of EdTech entrepreneurs, innovators in London. And I'm talking over 250 in a 3-year period. So we've had a huge project where we've not only had to grow a team, we've had to grow the expertise within the team to work out how we as a university could really support entrepreneurs who had really creative, innovative ideas for education to address some of those huge challenges we face around the world in the education system, to help them to become more research-minded about the way that they were going to build out their products. So we're going to explore that concept of research-mindedness both today, but also in the workshop on Wednesday. And towards the end of my presentation, my PhD student Anissa is going to introduce the context for the workshop, because there will be a little bit of homework for you to do in advance to get your heads in the space ready for that. So let's start thinking on that idea of research-mindedness. In our project, our sort of construct, and this is actually very embedded in our logo, is a golden triangle. And the golden triangle, the gold in this triangle is evidence. And I'm going to say a little bit about what we mean by this and why it's so important in the world of the ecosystem of educational technology. So if we take the EdTech developers, and they come from all different places. They can be ex-teachers, they can be people who've come from a technology background, they can be people who come from a business background. But one of the key questions that anyone who is developing an educational technology product wants to know pretty early on is, how can they find out what teachers, what their users, what the students think of the technology that they're building out? As soon as you've got something worth showing, you want to actually find out from the users, the people who you're aiming your technology for, to find out what they think. And often, unknowingly, what sort of research evidence might help me in building out my product? And I say unknowingly because I take a really honest view on humans and how we are. We know what we know. We don't know what we don't know. And sometimes you can't know what's going to help you if you don't know it exists. So the idea of research being out there somewhere, whose job is it to make sure that the research finds the people who are going to use it? Well, it's all of our job. And I take a very sort of holistic human view on that. And there's no blame here. We all work in the communities we work in, and we know the stuff that goes on in those communities. So we've got the EdTech development community who may be plugged into research, they may not be. They may be plugged into business, they may not be. But they know what they know. But what they want to do is find out if their products work. If we go to the education community, let's just do that 1 minute. If we think about the people who are going to be using this educational technology, that's the teachers, that's the parents, that's the district leaders who buy tech for lots of schools. They really want to know how they know if your technology is going to work. So we've immediately got a chicken and an egg situation. The companies want to find out whether the technology works. but the schools don't want to take it up until they know if the technology works. Yeah? And we all find ourselves in this loop where we've got to work together, otherwise we're never going to generate the evidence we need. But equally, the school and the university community want to know where the research is. That means your EdTech looks promising or your innovation looks promising. So there's that evidence need as well. And if we then bring in the academics, and on the whole, that's people like myself and my team at UCL, we're doing an awful lot of research around educational technologies, and we very often struggle to help it to find its way to these other two communities. So actually, we need to demonstrate the impact of our research work, but we also have a problem trying to reach the communities that might pick up on those ideas and make use of them. So everybody's doing their work, but we're in our separate communities. And what we saw the need for was a project that was going to bring these three groups together and generate evidence. Okay, and I'm going to say a little bit more about when we say evidence, what do we mean by evidence? But really, it's data, it's information, it's experiences, it's a whole host of things that help each of the three groups in the communities to learn from each other and learn with each other. So this idea of a joined up ecosystem where these three groups seamlessly talk to each other and exchange knowledge and experience and expertise is really at the heart of a really healthy educational technology ecosystem. And if we achieve that, we should get better products and services that are more aligned and useful for the people for whom they're being designed. The big goal that brings everybody into this context in the first place is to improve teaching and improve learning and have better experiences, a better, more engaging curriculum, all of those things. But we're not naive. The businesses do need to have good sales. They need to increase their sales. Otherwise, they won't be around in 5 years' time, 3 years' time, 2 years' time. So we need a sustainable business model that is going to enable businesses to grow whilst not compromising the educational goals that everybody set out to do. And the academics would have better research impact. Their ideas, their work would actually feed into the design of the innovations in the educational space. So this is the big end goal. And as part of addressing this important need, what I have to mention here is the situation at early stage of companies for small and medium-sized enterprises is very different to the very established educational companies, the Pearsons, the Hodders, the big publishing companies that now really have big teams. They often have their own research group inside their company. And if they need research, they've got an internal resource they can draw down on to conduct the research and work with the schools and generate that evidence. Now, for the SME community, that resource isn't there. So what we were looking to do was to devise a project that was going to enable us to bring these two groups together in the first instance. That doesn't mean we've forgotten about this educator community, but that's another talk for another day because we have another initiative that's addressing that. So focusing in on how can we bring academics with the research knowledge and expertise to work more closely with the educational technology developers so that we can together generate better evidence than that we've got already. Okay, now that brings us to the project. And behind the UCL Educate project is my colleague, Professor Rose Luckin. And what Rose was able to do was basically find a funding source. There's one thing you have to find the right people to fund a project like this, because what we needed to do was really focusing on business growth. And we found money through our European Regional Development Fund, which enabled us to fund a really large scale. We were talking about £3.5 million over a 3-year period to conduct the project that we've been able to do. And the whole goal of this was to work with small and medium-sized enterprises to help them to learn how to build an evidence base for their idea wherever it was in terms of the stage of development. So we needed companies to come in with an MVP, but it didn't need to be a digital MVP in the case of a digital product. It just needed to be a sound idea that looked like it had potential and that there was an educational need for that particular idea. So it was all about bringing small companies in to work with university academics who all came from an educational research background. So the extra resource here was around educational research, not market research, business research. We were really focusing in validating the educational impacts of the project. So, once you pass that, go back. So what we were trying to do was work with our small and medium-sized enterprises, and on the whole, that meant that we saw 1 or 2 or 3 people from the company. They were the people who engaged with the project, and we worked on how you find evidence. Basic, it's sort of thing that's very natural if you're a researcher to know where to look to find evidence. But, if you come from a business or a school's background, you might not have that skill set. So how do you actually locate useful evidence that exists already? How do you access it and make use of it? I say access it. I've taught on master's courses for years. Learning to read research is a skill, and it's a skill you can teach. And so, bringing those methods to busy business people in a way that makes sense, it was a key part for us. Most importantly, because what happens when you go out and do a bit of a literature review and look for resources to help you, you find things that are a bit useful or a bit like you need, but never quite what you need. So you have to learn how to generate evidence of your own. You have to think about how to develop a small-scale study that is going to enable you to learn a little bit more than you knew previously. And then, very importantly, you conduct your research. You then have to communicate and report findings. And in many cases, this is an internal process to the company. We're not talking about publishing research in public places, often because your IP is at the heart of it. You have to protect that very well. But not all companies are at the stage where they want to particularly share in depth what they're doing to the outside world. So for us, this research could be incredibly valuable inside the company. And I'll say a little bit more about how that works in practice. And then the most important aspect of us having an impact in this program was that this wasn't just one thing you did once to tick a box and say you've been through our program. What was most important was that the entrepreneurs that work with us could see the value in embedding research processes into their business practices. So you don't only end up with a business development plan and a product development plan, you have a research development plan that aligns with both of those 2 others. The research can't take you completely off track so that you stop thinking about your product development and you stop thinking about developing your business and finding your sustainable funding. So it's the usual entrepreneurial balancing act, balancing your resources. But what we wanted to do was teach a method that would allow you to think about how the research was going to help you to build out a sustainable, financially viable business. That was most important. Or, and this is a big important one, decide not to build out your business. Really important that, there's sort of an assumed success here. When you do research, you learn stuff, and you've got to be critical about where that takes you next. And in some cases, it does mean stop. And what we would say is better to learn that sooner than invest a load more money, time, efforts to then find that out later. So we're really talking about a lean research methodology here. So you learn fast, and then you use that learning to iterate and develop what you decide to do next. Now, educational technology for us in our project is way beyond the innovations and resources going into the school and university sector. So we have a very broad view about educational technologies. Obviously, it includes those, but our educational technology companies are developing EdTechs for professional settings. So 2 diverse examples, VR applications to help junior doctors learn how to build the skills needed to behave in an emergency room is an EdTech for us. It's a learning technology, as is a personalized learning environment for employees who are learning high-level business skills in a business environment in their companies. So these are all learning technologies. Family learning, that's apps that are really going into the home to support parents to enable their children to achieve well at school. Community learning and lifelong learning. We're seeing a real rise in what we would call well-being apps. We see that as an educational technology. Any technology that is expecting some sort of social impact on humans, for us, is educational and has an educational aspect to it that comes under that sort of broad range of educational research that is happening around the world. So all of these different situations, there will be very valuable research activities and research literature that will support you to build out products in those areas. So let me say a little bit about the Educate Lean research method. And if we start at the top and work clockwise. So one of the biggest challenges that we faced when we began to work with our companies, we worked with them in cohorts, so we didn't sort of have all 250 walk in the door at one point. But one of the biggest challenges was defining exactly what the thing was. And my research team, initially we thought that this was something that wasn't so important, but as we began to work more closely with the companies, we realized that if we didn't really understand what this product was, it was going to be very difficult to support and mentor a company to develop a research project. And obviously, inside your companies or inside your enterprises, you really know in your head so much that maybe isn't communicated even within your own teams, never mind to people outside of your teams. So one of this thing, the idea of defining what the thing is, we would have a 1 hour getting to know you with the entrepreneurs initially, and we would insist that the thing was on the table, whether it was a tangible or whether it was on the screen. If it was, whatever there was that would help us to understand what the product was something that needed to be really at the foreground of that conversation. And we started to develop the use of something called a logic model. I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a moment. But the idea that you really broke down exactly what was the resource that you were offering and how your users would engage with it to tell your story to educational impact. So what's the narrative that takes you from the product or the innovation you're putting in front of your particular users that you think is rationalizing the impact that you're designing for? Now, that is quite hard, and I will talk a little bit about the iterations that take place in that in a moment. But the idea was that if you didn't have a clear idea of what it was, you couldn't research it. Yeah, you needed to have that depth of knowledge to be able to think about what a sensible research activity might be at whatever stage of development that product is. So then it's about working with the online training and the mentoring to develop the research ideas and methods. And if anyone's been on a research methods course, again, it's very teachable. We've got common language for the sorts of tools that we use, and we've got certain ways of analyzing them that have got validity in educational research. So this is all stuff that can be taught. We've then got a reporting phase. We've got this important pivot phase, which is where you make decisions about how what you've learned will impact on your product design and your business strategy. And then it probably takes you around to a new iteration of your product. And this is the lean research cycle that we think is really helpful inside early stage companies. So let's have a little look at, before I do that, we work with 250 of the companies in London, and what we've been able to do in the last 6 months of the project is actually build out a digital environment to share our resources and practices with the global community. So we now have a digital environment which is available to anybody who is developing an educational innovation around the world. It doesn't actually have to be a technological one, interestingly. The technology in most cases is the tool. We've had examples of companies being through our program who have what we would call, a very traditional non-tech resource for a classroom or a learning situation. And we're doing this through our Educate Digital Accelerator, which we launched just before Christmas. And this is something that is free for anybody to join. I'm going to make it really clear to you today what you get from the free offer. There's always additional features that come with a paid offer, and I'll give you an indication of that in case you're interested, but I'm definitely not here this morning to sell you access to the digital accelerator. Just want to share how the methods are available to you should you want to choose them. So in the digital accelerator, what we're trying to do is create a natural home for EdTech entrepreneurs all around the world. Now, we've partnered with GSV, Global Silicon Valley, and they're a very established global network of tech entrepreneurial resources and people. And we partner with GSV to give, if you like, a bespoke educational technology front skin to their environment. So quite a lot of the resources we've got there right now will draw down on the existing GSV resources, but we've got some that we've developed with GSV that make this a very unique offer. So a very quick sort of walk around the world, and then I'm going to focus in on a couple of things in more depth. I'm going to talk about the canvases in a minute. The perks is literally the sort of thing you'd expect in an entrepreneurial environment. These are all heavily discounted offers for access to the suite of techs that most startups are thinking about. So I'm talking mixed panel, I'm talking full story, I'm talking Stripe for payments. So if you are drawing down on some of the other tools that are out there, you'll probably find them in there, and you'll probably find a heavily discounted offer in the perks. Now, the perks is something that obviously links in with the paid for service, but we have had feedback from our companies that they literally get their money back for the joining the network from almost 2 or 3 of the perks in there. Resources are a whole host of curated, mostly video-led insights from the experts around the world. So there is some really high quality content in there, and we are adding to that content on a monthly basis. Obviously, members lets you know who else is in the community, and mentors gives you access to a huge global network of mentors, not just from the business world, but we will also be increasing, as we find them, the research mentor community who will be able to support you on some aspects of what you might do next. Obviously, companies gives you the list of the other companies in the world, and your profile is your profile. So it's a fairly standard offer in terms of the network organization. But the really important areas that I'm going to focus on are the canvases that we've offered out, and also what's inside the courses. So I mentioned this process of creating a logic model, and I'd like to just outline what we mean by that, because it's a very old idea. It's not ours, and it's not unique. But this actually was something developed by the Kellogg's Foundation, and that is Kellogg's, as in Kellogg's cornflakes, who have a large educational foundation in the US, and they fund a lot of evaluation studies. And one of the things that they found was that, traditional research means that you design everything up front before you go away and start doing things. So you literally decide what your research questions are and your methodology, and it all has to be absolutely tight. And then this idea, you just go away and do it. You conduct it, you get the data, and then you do exactly the analysis you said you were going to do at the beginning. And that's all fine and good for any sort of intervention that is stable. Things aren't going to change much. Yeah, you know exactly the situation you're going to do that research in is really tight. Now, we know with early stage, particularly EdTech, you hardly ever get to that point, if ever. Can you imagine you not making any changes to your product or your platform over a 6-month or 9-month period whilst a study is going on, or a 3-year period while a study is going on? It's very unlikely. So we need shorter interventions, if you like, and we need a framework that's going to work inside that intervention. And the way this works is it's ever so logical, hence its name, but you provide stuff in the form of your platform, resource, innovation thing. People do things with your stuff, activities. They log on, they answer questions, they communicate with people. And if they do that stuff, and you have to think in a very techie mind here, from your headquarters back at base, looking at your back end, you see data flying past you. Now, if you're not there watching them, that's all you get. Agreed? No way of, you haven't got this magic eye into the situations. You've only got the outputs that you see at your back end. And if you notice week on week those outputs are changing in some way, increasing, decreasing, speeding up, slowing down, you start to be able to claim some outcomes. Yeah? So you see the data changing, and it's those changes in those outputs that helps you to have hunches around what the outcomes might be. And at the moment, if you're in your back end, in your headquarters, that's probably all you've got to go on. Yeah, so it's not necessarily a very rich data set, but that's what you've got. And over time, if you see these outcomes stabilizing, you'll start to say, wow, we're really moving the needle here. We're really having an educational impact in the way that we designed our innovation to have. So that's the story. That's your narrative to impact. Now, what happens in reality is when we start to work on these logic models, we realize we don't see enough in the outputs. So we do other things. We send a user survey out, we questionnaire, we go and observe, we talk to teachers, we interview. And that's where essentially you're starting to use educational research methods. So your research would be focused on how do you do that extra little bit in a nice, systematic, robust way that is going to enhance the data you get here and then enable you to tell a stronger story or pivot. Okay, so the logic model is really key to this, and it's one of those things that it only makes sense when you start to work it through for your own context, so for your own innovation, your own idea. So inside the Educate Digital program, platform, one of the resources that we've made available to the world because we think it's really important is in the canvases space. And there are two canvases there at the moment, the logic model canvas. There's also a business model canvas, and there's soon to be going on a research ideas canvas. And if you choose to create a new canvas, what you get is an interactive template which enables you to start to build out that logic model, but also work on it real time with colleagues that you've invited to share with it, and also you can export it to share and use with other people. So the idea is we've given you a platform where you can start to build out the logic model for your particular intervention, and in a format that you can go back to, you can iterate on, and most importantly, I would say, share and involve others in helping you to make sense of it, because it's definitely one of those tasks that needs more than one brain to it. So the idea of the logic model is very much to fix for a point in time, and it might only be a day or a week or a month before things change again, getting everybody on the same page with respect to the particular product that you're going to build out. So I wanted to show this live because I can't bear static screens. I'm not a static person at all. So if I'm inside the platform now and I'm going to go to the canvases, I would literally build a new canvas. You're always going to be given the option to share it. So you decide how you want to restrict it. I always like to start with things very private until I'm ready to share. But this is literally a document where you can start to follow the prompts to build out your logic model. And then when you're ready and you're happy, you can publish it down at the bottom. I haven't put any text in yet, so it won't let me. But once I've filled out the ideas, so I'm literally going to add my context, give it a title, build it out. And one of the key areas on the side is each time you fill one of those boxes in, you write down what your assumptions are. So if I go to my example, and I've thrown the example in here as a challenge to the world, because one of the really important products I think we need to build out is World Saver. I think we have a need to save the world right now, which is built around an app that I'd like to build around the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And I'd like to essentially crowdsource the world to get its act together, because there are many, many things we need to do right now. But basically, I've gone through, I've got some technology that I need to have in place, I've got some content I need to create, and I've got some assumptions. People have got access to technology to be able to engage with it. I've got a whole host of activities they're going to do. I've got the sort of data I think I'm going to get through the platform. Again, lots of assumptions. This is an important assumption we all make when people create profiles in your platform, that they're genuine, that they're honest. If they say they're a 12-year-old child, they actually are a 12-year-old child. It's a very easy assumption to make, but it's one that will often catch us out. So your assumptions are there to really help you to think about research questions you might need to probe. They're not all going to become research projects. They're just important things that you will want to seek to validate as you go. But that's an example of a logic model. And if I wanted to, I could share that with other colleagues and invite them to comment on it, give me feedback on it. So this logic model is a really critical stage to building out your idea in a way that A, other people can understand, and it helps you with all levels of communication, because it's going to help you not only to talk to other colleagues in your organizations, but also communicate with schools, with teachers, with your end users in a much clearer way. So it's hard work, but it's one of those things that's really worth the effort. So if we come to the second element of the, if we come to the next element in our cycle, the developing research ideas and methods. Now, in that phase, our companies in London had access to my team of 8 research mentors with 12 hours of support and research training, and they had a very human, physical support process. And obviously, as you scale something, you're not always able to offer that initially. So for the research ideas and methods, that aspect of support is provided in our learning hub. And what we've done is we've taken our face-to-face London training model, and we've digitized that in a MOOC-style environment. It's not synchronous, so you won't be in there with cohorts of other people at the same time. You'll be working on it in a very individualized way, unless we find ways to build communities together. So we have just launched Educate France, and in Educate France, they will be taking cohorts through in a much more together way, which we know is a better route. So it doesn't mean you can't be a lone learner here in your company, but we certainly know that having the glue of a community working through something at the same time is a far better and more effective learning model. But inside the Learning Hub, there are over 20 courses that really take you through a blend of, and it's all EdTech specific here. So this is business, a business and a research development specifically to educational technology, because there are some differences. And one of the most critical ones that we've observed is people who go in to build educational technology companies and enterprises are very driven by vision and purpose towards human social impact goals. That doesn't mean they're not interested in the bottom line and making money and making their businesses sustainable, but that there is a different value set in the mindset of educational entrepreneurs. So that's something that really comes through in our courses, and those will guide you through using the resources on the site to help you develop research proposals that are going to really enable you to learn valuable information about your companies. The other key community is our community, and that's inside a Slack channel. And there's something exciting about being in a Slack channel with the global educational technology community, or the global educational innovation community. And this is something that will obviously continue in time. So it's a really great way. One of the things that we're seeing coming through that already is people are often looking for talent. They're looking to employ people, whether they need CTOs, whether they need the technical team, or they need to build the business team, or the educational marketing team. You know, how do you, reaching out to a global community to actually find the people who are going to enrich and support you in what you're doing is something that really can come through lively online communities. So the Slack channel there is already, it's already got about 150 people in, just in the last we've launched 3 weeks ago. So it's growing really nicely, and it's a bit like finding your global tribe. So I would suggest that that's a very good reason for joining. And if we start to think about how, why do we even need to worry about generating research? Who cares about whether we generate research? Because, you don't, this isn't something anybody's particularly asking you to do, but the whole process of building that evidence-informed learning technology is something that actually has an ethical grounding to it. So if we take a medical analogy, nobody would dream of taking a serious drug without knowing that it had been thoroughly researched to be effective. And we don't have that sort of regulation and legislation in education. And it's interesting because if you go back to, I was writing a blog post the other day, and I was thinking about how, if you think about educational publishing and the textbook industry, which is a massive global industry, nobody ever said to a school, have you evaluated whether that textbook's effective before you bought a textbook scheme? So it's really interesting that in a way people are coming down hard on the educational technology industry when actually we didn't have that level of scrutiny on the resources that were going out into schools before. And it's almost, it's an interesting thing to ponder. This demand is coming from somewhere, and it's actually more aligned to the fact that education systems are cash-strapped. Yep, they have limited resource. There's huge educational need, and it's much more of a return on investment conversation with technology than it ever was with textbooks and other resources that go into schools. And so it's quite interesting to think about, education is unregulated in terms of the resources that come into schools in a lot of countries, not all. Some countries are very top-down in the educational resources that they choose and use. But having an argument for why your particular innovation is justified or valid, particularly if it has a cost implication, is something that really needs to be, we need to take the ethical stance there and say, why do we care about researching our products are effective? It's because we must. It's because these are impacting on children's lives and learners' lives positively and negatively. And sometimes the negative implications, it's really important to learn those as well. So I think it's having that very ethical view on why educational technology isn't the wild, or shouldn't be the Wild West. So how do we work towards helping companies to evidence that they've been through our program? And it's really an interesting one because when we started out, one of the things that lots of people misunderstood about what we were trying to do was that we were going to, as a university, give the companies a stamp of approval on their tech. So we were going to enable them to go away and say, right, UCL Institute of Education, #1 education institution in the world, says our educational technology works. What better thing could you get out of a program than that? And of course, we wouldn't say that in a million years for the reason I sort of said it already is the technology keeps changing. And if a product works today in 5 UK schools with children with a special learning difficulty, I'm certainly not going to say that product will work in Finland or Belgium or Germany, even with similar types of kids, that there are so many things that wrap around the context in which the technology is used. It's impossible, you've heard it from me, it is impossible to state once and for all that any intervention works in education, because there are just too many variables in our educational system. That means that we have to be a little bit more humble, I would say, in the way that we interpret evidence. So we can have a lot of indications that it looks promising, but each context will be different. And I think it's really important that we understand that. So what we decided we would do is, rather than put a stamp on the product, which we weren't prepared to do, was to say, well, hang on a minute, the company looks good. The company's engaged. The company gets why research is important. Those founders are, good people who are approaching the development of their technology in a responsible way. We can give the company a badge, and that's what we've done. So we've got our Edwards, and we have 2 levels of Edward. One is evidence aware, and all of the companies that actually engage with the digital program will be able to access these awards as well. but the evidence-aware Edward is focused on saying your company is aware of the importance of evidence. You've engaged with the first phase of the program, which is to develop your logic model and research proposal. And we've left you there to go away and do it. Right? It's up to you whether you do it, but we've left you there ready to do it. And you're aware that evidence is important. If you come back and report your findings, and I will say reporting is reporting to the project team, it's not reporting necessarily to the world, and you've managed to conduct your study and communicate it in a way that other people can find useful and make sense of, then the evidence applied, Edward, is something that you can be awarded. And this is I've hidden his face here, but this is our lovely John from Pobble, which is one of our very promising looking educational technology companies in the UK. And we recently had the British Educational Technology Awards, British Educational Technology Show in London. And I was very delighted as I was walking around. I actually played a game called Spot the Edward. On the last day, a Saturday, I was there with my colleague and it was a little bit quiet. We said, come on, let's go around and take photos of all the companies that have been through our program that have got their Edwards on their stands. Because that for us was validation that what we were doing was valued by industry. Yeah, if it was there on the stand and we didn't tell them to do this, that was our moment when we said, oh my goodness, there's about 5 companies out there and they've all got their Edwards on their stands. And it was quite a proud moment because, you know, we worked hard in working with 250 companies over the last 2.5 years. And it was a hunch. It was Rosie's hunch that this was something that would be needed and valuable. So to have that validation from the industry was a really proud moment for us. So there's something in it, is what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's the answer, but there's something in it. So those little Edwards, look out for them. Before I move on and introduce Anissa, I did want to mention the context, particularly in the UK, because we do have an educational technology strategy from our government at the moment, and there are a number of funding opportunities there that might be of interest to people. But essentially what we've got is a fairly small initiative in terms of budget. This isn't something that's going to reach every school by any means. But we've got 3 strands where we are developing a whole host of test-bed schools and colleges. And these have actually they're in the final stages of being approved. They are going to be schools that have already put their hand up to say, hey, you're developing a new innovative tech. Our door's open for you to come and talk to us about trialing it and piloting it. So that's a very promising opportunity. We also are supporting the industry, and interestingly, Pobble was one of the companies that got funding from the innovation competition, where they're actually looking to support companies, again, with promising tech, to have a little bit of investment to conduct a more rigorous pilot in schools, often working in partnership with the schools that have said they're keen. And what's interesting there is we got feedback from John when he went for his interview, and it was really interesting that the research he did when he was on the Educate program was a really big part of the conversation because he demonstrated his research mindedness. So when the Department for Education started asking about how he knew whether his product worked or not, he had the first part of that evidence story, and that certainly helped him to win that funding. And then finally, we've got demonstrator schools and colleges, which, if you like, are the exemplar ones that other schools can go and visit to see established tech in action. So these are 3 of the initiatives going on in the UK at the moment. Just finally, before I introduce Anissa, the idea that you know, this evidence that we're generating, you know, who is interested in it? We do know teachers and schools are interested in it. They were asking for it earlier on. Interestingly, we know parents are very interested in it. Parents face the same Wild West. They want to find a reading app for their preschool child. Where's the place that curates, you know, what they should be looking at first? We've got a number of initiatives in the UK which are beginning to curate apps for parents. And the other key area for us are wellbeing apps. So we've got 2 big funded projects where they're trying to create a bit of a one-stop shop. Now, these generally aren't marketplaces. They're much more advice, guidance, support. How do I know where to go? But they're beyond TripAdvisor. Yeah, so it's not just nice bites from people. There's a bit more substance to it. And this is the one I really wanted to draw attention to, is increasingly, and this is a really positive as far as I'm concerned, because we need the investor community to wake up for this, the investor community. So within their metrics, when they look at you and decide on investment, you know, watch out for this and let me know if you see this change. But, you know, if the investor community starts to think about valuing your evidence base as much as they do you as an individual and your team and your product, then we really will start to fund the best EdTech. And it won't be just the most charismatic, loud, prominent people that get the funding. Yeah, we'll get the right EdTech, getting the right funding, and actually getting a lot more female founders funded, because this is an issue globally, particularly in educational technology, where the investor community does seem to discriminate against female founders. And this is certainly something that needs rebalancing, because an awful lot of educational technology ideas come from ex-teachers, and there are large proportions, particularly in the primary school age, of female founders in that area. So there's a bit of redressing the balance, and there's a bit of waking up needed in the community there. And then, because we are here as part of the European EdTech Network, and UCL is a founding partner, we're really proud to be a founding partner of this network. In case you haven't seen them, one of the ways in which we're getting evidence out from my team is, my team has been developing the EdTech Bites. So if you've been on the EETN website and seen the EdTech Bites, we're trying to put a two-pager first read together if you want sort of key information on topics, as well as doing our bit to contribute to the programs, events, and growing the network. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Anissa now, who's going to introduce the context for the workshop that we will be doing on Wednesday.